What is that sound? That's better. I'm in the middle of my frame now.
Okay.
I just couldn't tell which way to go.
Which way do you want to go?
Just which way to be in the center.
You want to be in the center. What does the center mean to you?
What does the center mean? I guess it means the middle of things. I mean, depends on what you mean. What do you mean by the center? Like the locus, like the center of action of an occurrence? That could be a location or a place.
Isn't that the
Or it could,
epicenter?
well, the epicenter would be the very middle of a place, right? Or a thing.
Yeah.
And so
But you
center,
named your channel the Radical Center. So what does that mean? Is it just
well,
like
I
you're
guess,
just going to follow wherever the Overton window is, and if it keeps on shifting left, you'll just keep on being dragged along?
hopefully not. I guess it for me it was sort of an ironic name, and it was a name I chose because it represented something politically centrist and that it's there's nothing the irony and the humor in it is that there's nothing really radical about being a centrist, and it shouldn't be radical, but it feels like everything's pulling so far to the poles right now that it's almost a radical position to try to hold to the middle.
Oh, what poles? Can you describe the poles? What are these
Politically,
poles? Yeah.
like, left versus right, people digging in on their positions and having intolerance of the other side's perspective. Have the idea of sides at all, really.
Okay. So what is this right extremism? In my point of view, that's completely, it's fabricated by the left in order to get it away with dragging everybody to the left.
Well, I don't know what it means right now, right extremism. I guess it would represent sort of these sort of boogeyman political concepts of like white supremacy or I don't know. I guess to me the right when I was younger anyway, when I was in my early 20s and maybe the mid 20s, around the Bush years, the right represented war and corporatism and just this callousness of short-sighted, I don't know, short-sighted opportunism, corporate opportunism, fascist marriage between state and corporations. So that was what the right represented to me then. I don't really know what it represents now, except for maybe an intolerance of understanding some of the reasons why things are happening on the left.
An intolerance for understanding why some of the things are happening on the left. So like the lack of a psychological viewpoint. Is that another way of saying what you just said?
The lack of a psychological viewpoint. Maybe it just I guess what it's representing is just a backlash right now. When people say extreme right, I don't know what they're really talking about, except for maybe an angry backlash against some of the stuff that's happening on the left, because I don't really see anything that extreme at the moment happening on the right. Except that I mean, in general, I think that the right and the left are kind of two wings of the same bird, and it's not really that meaningful to make those separations.
Okay. So the radical centrist, riding the bird or riding the tiger or riding the dragon? Or opting out, like just trying to weave a parachute out of the feathers of whatever you're standing on.
I guess so. I guess so. Opting out, more taking a look at everything and making your own decisions
Okay.
about what you think and not really pledging allegiance to a side.
Okay. What do you pledge allegiance to then?
Oh, gosh. I don't know. That's a big question.
Truth, beauty, goodness?
Um, those are nice things.
But not enough to commit yourself allegiancely.
I
Because
don't
they're too
know.
wishy-washy? Yeah.
I think that if I were to try to pledge allegiance to some concept like that, there would be examples of how I invalidate that. It'd be really hard to hold to
Okay.
something so vague.
Okay. All right. Okay.
What do you
Like
think?
centrism.
Yeah, I guess
Centrism
so.
is so vague, but if you have like
It
an
is.
ironic kind of thing, I was playing around with different versions of centrism. You know, I play this thing called Twitter. It's a massively multiplayer online role playing game where you make sentences and you throw them at people, or you just throw them out into the void, or you reply to other people's sentences with your sentences. Sometimes you use pictures or videos and stuff like that. It's kind of a rapidly changing, like morass of internet and skulldrudgery and mindfuckery. But
Ooh,
you know, the way that I approach sentences, I have a particular I don't want to call it knack, but predilection for the sentence. I trained myself partially in my literary endeavors as a fledgling writer, stumbling upon William Blake's Marriage of Heaven and Hell when I was 19, and really enjoying Nietzsche's aphorisms and Pascal's pensées, which is a collection of aphorisms too. I've studied the sentence, right? Like, what is the sentence? How does it work? You know, what is its purpose? What is its use? What's the possibility in this thing called a sentence? So when I stumbled upon Twitter later on in life, my Dante era, you know, like halfway through life, and Virgil comes to me in the form of either Brett Weinstein or Twitter, and I opened Twitter to start playing this Twitter game. You know, I was already ready to play that game, and I could have played it earlier, but I just hated the word Twitter and I hated the word tweet. Like, I just thought it was so chintzy and stuff. So I had an account a long time ago, and I made a couple of sentences and then I just forgot about it. But then I started using it for political and then for business purposes to connect the dots of what I was looking at sociopolitically. And then as I got more involved in it, I used it as a news aggregator to see what's going on, and then to kind of somewhat socialize to a certain degree. But I already had like a kind of thoughts on sentences, or a practice of writing sentences, and you know, it just like be kind of like gaming time in the evening. I'd have a beer and smoke cigarettes and I'd write sentences. And so all goes to say, like, the word centrist or centrism was very popular, got very popular along with this thing called politically homeless, being politically homeless, or, you know, and people throw these things out kind of trying to counter signal tribalism. Okay. They're looking for a tribe, but they think they're kind of beyond tribalism. Whenever somebody says I'm politically homeless, it smacks of this air of like, I was unaware that I was in a tribe, and then I realized I was in a tribe and it hurt me. So I'm going to not be in a tribe right now, but that's my tribe. But centrism is like, what is that? What's the content of that? And you do have to look at, like, well, what's the content of the left? What's the content of the not left? At this point in time, I'm thinking there's the left, which would be technocratic, organizational, centralized power, and the mechanisms of technocracy, just kind of running on their own. And the people that obey that and follow that and take their instructions from that are in alignment or in accordance with the left. And that includes the so-called Republicans, or, you know, at least the United States, you know, federal government. Like, it's all the federal government. It's all left. It's all like, it's this behemoth that is not human. It's superhuman. It's it's a power, it's a principality, it's Cthulhu, and it always swims left towards more power, towards abstracting the human being into different categories or integers that it can then perfect and refine. And critiques of that system tend to kind of be from the not left or from the dissident right. So there's like, and then there's like a lot of counters to that, like accelerationism, raw egg nationalism, like return to life or return to nature movements, vitality movements, bodybuilding movements, kind of like shit posting movements, and then religious fundamentalist movements of various stripes, and the sort, because people who begin to look underneath the hood of what's going on, all these liberal assumptions that we had as good, upstanding Gen Xers, on the right side of history, and not as radical as those who came after us, not as radical as these millennials or the Gen Zers. We were kind of like soft radicals because we were kind of too cool for school. I don't know if you were like that or not, but, when George Bush decided to drop bombs on Iraq and we wanted to rail against that, we were still doing that in our T-shirts and our economy that was completely based on, I don't think exploitation is the right word, but let's just say exploitation of the American system, of the rest of the world. So centrism, what does that mean? Political centrist? One of the sentences that I wrote about centrism was that, the centrist, there's a normal centrist, the normie centrist, who sits on the fence and then gets run over because they're actually standing in the middle of the road. The radical centrist becomes the road, gets run over so much that they become the road, or the vehicle or the path by which communication can occur between all these different lanes. Right, the ability to supersede or to become a container of different ideologies, of different points of view, and guiding the conversation by being able to be connected to all the information that are housed in all these different political tribes. That is a way of being necessarily tribal. I don't think we can lie to ourselves and say we're not tribal. We're always looking for a tribe. We love to be agreed with, and we hated to be disagreed with, no matter how astute and lofty we are. We always have a tribe. And there's different ways of being super tribal, like through humor or through relaxing, or through one of my other sentences is weak opinions strongly held. And that doesn't mean that my opinions themselves are weak, but my conviction in any given opinion is weak. But it's strongly worded. A weak opinion strongly worded. So I try to word things like a good frickin' sentence, like trying to find that statement, but I don't necessarily believe in anything because belief is a lower form of functioning than knowledge gaining. Opinion is a lower form of engagement with the information sphere or climate than is kind of exploring that and then seeing and connecting with people through these things. So people who are necessarily caught up in a tribalism, a fundamentalism of some sort, I find it's difficult to connect with them because I can only connect to their ideology because they're not yet fully human, or they aren't yet capable of translating their opinions or their received opinions or their lived experience into something that they can communicate as like, this is how I came to, here's my process of discovering, here's where I'm at. And so, there we go. That's my answer to you.
It's a good answer.
Was it though? Was it an answer even? Did I even get to the point?
It was an exploration.
It was a venture.
It was a venture.
If I talk too much, just let me know.
Okay.
What about you?
No, it's fine. No, it's good. What about me with what?
What were your thoughts about all the things that I just kind of splurged upon you?
Well, I guess I've never been that politically savvy. I like your idea of the center as a road through which two sides can communicate with one another. And I guess that sums up that comes closer to my thinking. It's about keeping openness and not becoming dug in to a position, especially not a position that's based on reaction or opposition to another position.
Okay.
And so I guess that's closer to my way of thinking about the center. The center
But
is
there are things that are beyond the pale.
in terms of,
I'm sure that you have deeply held convictions where you can't just say both sides are equally valid in this.
no, I don't think that both sides are equally valid. No.
Okay.
I just don't want to take a position that's based on sort of cult-like alignment with one like set of political structures or beliefs.
Okay.
And that's something that I feel like we're seeing on the left, especially right now.
But the problem with that is that it's kind of a cop-out. Because again, it's like it's this politically homeless thing. Like I'm beyond belief. I'm beyond a set of beliefs. That doesn't give you anything to stand on. So I'm sure in practice, you actually do have held beliefs. You do have virtues or values that you continually return to, even if you don't do so perfectly with the truth and the beautiful and the goodness, right? You still have these kind of guiding lights or this framework that if you don't own up to in a bid to be open, I think it creates or could cause cognitive dissonance or ineffectiveness or just kind of a not being aware of yourself as somebody who does have strongly held beliefs, like about GMOs or about vaccines or about child transition. Like there's a number of different things that we could talk about, and it would be cool to see, like, of all your really strongly held beliefs, like what is the thing that ties them together, like from child transition to GMOs to TV, video games, pornography. Like what's kind of like the theme, the thread of values that runs through your most trenchant positions.
Well, you're going to put me on the spot about this, like in a recording.
I'm going to put you on the spot.
Like
Me?
You're asking me that right now, like in a recording.
Me put you on the spot. Do you not want to be put on the spot? Is that beyond your radical centrism? You keep your. I mean, it could be a method. I mean, I try to do that when I'm as an interview. I try to put myself aside. Like being put on the spot is like not necessarily. I don't want it to color like my adventures or ventures. But when you're in the interview seat.
I know. I'm just not usually in the interview seat, so it's a little bit strange.
Yeah, the tables have turned.
Yeah, I think that like what I've been doing, I'm not the whole public speaking thing is pretty new for me. It's just been since October that I've been doing a lot of these videos, and I usually keep I talk a little bit about my opinions, but I tend to keep myself somewhat neutral on a lot of things and spend more time focusing on what other people think. And so I haven't tried to articulate a lot of these thoughts out loud. And it's really disconcerting to see myself on the screen while I'm talking. I like to keep it off.
You can't ignore yourself?
No, it makes me self-conscious to see myself on screen.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
Are you good at ignoring yourself? Well, you're not looking. You're like looking. Do you see yourself on the screen?
I see the same thing, but I'm looking at you.
Okay.
And plus, I'm not full screen, so it's just like my box and your box are really small. So I just can block out, and I just look over to me to make sure that I'm in frame, and that the light isn't too distracting. But I'm still working on my lighting. I just moved, so I have a new setup that I'm working on. Yeah,
it's a new background.
It's my first background, so I don't know what to do. That was the first thing that I had behind me when I first started this whole YouTube thing 6 years ago.
It's pretty. It reminds me of this scarf.
Oh, okay.
I was sitting on, actually.
Oh, okay.
So.
Oh, nice.
There. I'll match your background. So let me see. You asked if there's a thread that runs through a lot of the things that I believe.
Yeah.
I think that one underlying value I have is in uh, individual autonomy and the ability of the individual to make decisions for themselves. So,
Hmm.
or oneself, I guess. I think we've become a culture that relies on expert authority to such a degree that we've lost the ability to make discernments about certain aspects of our lives that we otherwise would be. What, you look like you have a question. What's your
I do have
question?
a question. Sorry to interrupt you. I would put it to you that we haven't exactly lost the ability to make up our own minds, but we have lost the ability to trust other people.
To trust other people? Okay.
And I'm thinking specifically about this Sam Harris quote that I shared with. Is it okay that we just mentioned that we have a lot of communication? Or should we keep that under wraps? Doesn't matter. I shared with you this thing of about Sam Harris. I'm just going to read it really quick. Where is it? So Sam Harris, he was a neo-atheist. He was one of the four horsemen of the anti-Christian new atheism movement that had its heyday about, 10 years ago? 15 years ago. And then this thing called Trump happened, and then this thing called the pandemic happened, and he went from somebody who was railing against organized religion to somebody who would write this in all seriousness and honesty. So quote Sam Harris on his Instagram: during the pandemic, we witnessed the birth of a new religion of contrarianism and conspiracy thinking, the first sacrament of which is to do your own research. The problem is that very few people are qualified to do this research, and the result is a society driven by strongly held, unfounded opinions on everything from vaccine safety to the war in Ukraine. So that last two sentences shows you that he's a part of a particular form of sense-making in the world: vaccine safety and the war in Ukraine. And what those two things have to do with each other only has to do that people have opinions on those that disagree with Sam's. And Sam's opinion, apparently, or one would assume, is with these non-conspiracy theorists who have all the data and who are true and who've always been right, to a greater or lesser extent, even though we see and we witnessed these so-called experts be crammed down our throat and be given ultimate power to silence every other voices, and then continually be wrong, at least in the case of vaccines in the COVID pandemic. So I think I just wanted to add to your perspective that it appears that people have lost their ability to make up their own minds with that. The system encourages people to distrust other people that make up their mind differently than its will. So, and I think there's a rift in us trusting authority. I think there's a deep crisis in authority and in basically cultural trust. Like we live in a very low trust society.
Okay, that's a good point, and that's interesting. I think something that helped me to understand my thinking on this was reading John Taylor Gatto, and I read some of his work. He was a teacher, but he's considered the father of the unschooling movement, and he talked a lot about the reasons why we went to a compulsory schooling system and the purpose behind the compulsory schooling movement. And one of the intended effects of it was to create a more networked society where people function more like workers in a factory, where each person has a specialization in some area, and this creates an efficient society where people can depend on one another to operate different areas of life. And so no one person is operating on a subsistence level themselves, having to do everything from making their own food to their own clothing and textiles to, growing whatever it is. So building their own home, we network those things out. And so through an interconnected web, we can support the areas of life that help everybody to thrive. And so that's the ideal, is this system of efficiency where we depend on other people. But we lose the ability to maintain certain functions for ourselves when we rely on other people to take those up, just by necessity. That's just by definition. We're giving up those areas. And is there a point at which we've gone too far with that? And is there a point where the system is something that's so large and looming so large in our lives that we've lost sight of what it means to be an individual and live a productive and meaningful existence? I mean, if we're just plugging into one part of this, how do we find value, and how do we value what we do in our work? And I guess I have to wonder about, when you say losing trust in each other, I guess there is that. So if you're all just plugged in as different cogs in a machine, do you trust the other cogs, or are you looking up at the machine as the thing from which you receive your information and your decision? And so, like, what does the average person, just living their little life with their little family, going to their little job, why do they need to have a particular opinion about the war in Ukraine, for instance? Yeah. What does it matter what their opinion is? And where do they get the information that they would base such an opinion on? Their opinion is probably, if they're in the US, what's that opinion going to be based on? Maybe they have friends or family who have firsthand knowledge, and so they can get secondhand information about it, but probably they're getting it through their news sources. And so it's just filtering in. It's being received through channels that, why should they trust any of those channels? Why should they trust the government channel? Why should they trust the alternative channel? It's all just, at that point, it's almost got the value of entertainment.
Yeah.
It's just
not only it's not even about trust, it's about caring. It's like, is this relevant to my life? The fact that the United States government is sending trillions of dollars over to Ukraine does, through our supposed democratic representative government, kind of make us all culpable in a certain way of framing things for the war in Ukraine. So to have an opinion on it is like, it's kind of our responsibility.
But if the people who are asking you to fund it are also the people who are providing you with the information about what you're funding, then how are you able to have a meaningful... Okay. But how is your opinion meaningful in any way?
Yeah.
And so I'm not saying that they're wrong. I'm not saying that the opinion that they're trying to get the populace to adopt is wrong. I just don't know. I don't have any way of knowing that myself. I have no way of knowing. And so, and similar about other issues, like, you brought up vaccines, right? Sam Harris and his quote about vaccines, like, that's another one where we're given an opinion that we're supposed to have. We're supplied with our opinion, and then we're supposed to hold that very strongly. And when the response to asking what seem like reasonable intellectual questions about such an issue, say it's the war in Ukraine, say it's vaccines, whatever it is, when the response that you get when you start asking questions, why? And then, you just follow the logic and you ask questions about these things. If the institution's response is to say, you're an idiot, don't ask those questions, you're just a conspiracy theorist, then how are you supposed to have confidence in the quality of the information you're receiving?
When was the first time that began to happen to you? Like the loss in confidence in the authorities that you'd accepted? I guess I'm sure it's been several different times, but the one that kind of set you up to your current way of thinking, like probably a bigger break, maybe from the George W. Bush to the Obama thing, that kind of era.
Gosh, it was just always like that for me. I just never, even in elementary school, it just felt like there was a lot of hypocrisy. I never trusted institutions and authority.
Okay. Did that set you up to success or hardship?
Well, I guess define success.
Or hardship?
Hardship. Yeah.
Yeah, success would be the lack of hardship.
Oh, is that right? Is that what success is?
I think that's a solid enough definition for the current purposes.
I have to think about that. That's interesting. No, I think there's difficulty in going against the grain.
Yeah. Do you experience contrarian joy or contrarian euphoria by going against the grain?
I guess there's some joy in aligning with your own thoughts and values and being able to say them and not. It's very hard, like, being in graduate school, which I've spent a lot of time talking about, so people might be able to reference that, and having this woke stuff kind of, poured on really thick, and feeling like I'm not sure how much I can challenge this, or, just that tiptoeing around your thoughts about an issue. That's really quite painful, that kind of cognitive dissonance and that kind of self-censorship, I think. So I don't know if I'd call it euphoria, but it is liberating to be able to just speak openly about what you think. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So is that contrarian euphoria? I don't know.
How is that centrist, though? I mean, sorry to grill you, but
no, I don't know if that is centrist.
Yeah, because you're saying, I just detect a bit of a reactionary bent or cowlick or part of your hair going in that.
Oh. Probably. Okay, so probably. I think I do have. I think I automatically question things when they're stated too forcefully.
Okay.
And I think that I do that within myself as well. When something seems like an automatic thought, I want to question it. Like, I'm trying to think of an example. I'm not coming up with an example right now, but if you ever get that like smug disdain for somebody else's opinion, I think it's time to question that and wonder, where does that come from? Why do I feel that way?
Yeah. I'm guilty of that. I'm a part of I volunteer for a spiritual group, and the spiritual group is split into male and female. When we do our spiritual practice, it's split into male and female, and that's just how it's been. And but it's a non-dogmatic spiritual group. Like, we don't profess to have any beliefs. But over the past 20 years specifically, more and more people, and we have these congresses and we do these bylaws and stuff, and there's this encroachment of equality and inclusion and diversity in these statements. Like, we are a non-discriminatory, we don't judge people based on race, homosexuality, sexual orientation, gender expression, blah 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 blah. Which, when I first encountered that 20 years ago, and I was half my age, I was 24 or whatever. And I was at a Congress in Portland, which is what caused me to move from Chicago to Portland. Just worthless biographical detail, but they had this whole thing about wanting to be inclusive for gay people. Like, they really, like, the United States branch of the spiritual organization really wanted to promote that we are inclusive of gay people by making a statement in the bylaws that we don't discriminate based on sexuality or race or all these other things. And I'm like, if we are an organization that doesn't profess to have beliefs, how are we going to enforce this if somebody happens to not get along with somebody and there's a difference in sexuality, or if somebody doesn't get along with somebody and there happens to be a difference in race or power plus privilege? It's just, I already detected on that very, what is anodyne the right word? Just this very saccharine, like, virtue signal level, that this stuff is, it's a toehold for authoritarians to come in and start to police people's behavior. Now, how do you be against anti-racism without being pro-racism? That's the whole trick that they put. How do you be against performative inclusion, diversity, and equity or equality without implicitly being for inequality, discrimination, and exclusion? Right? But now...
It's about the definition of those terms.
Those terms are... And maybe this is the problem that I have, because I could see people just getting really passionate about this thing and not really thinking about how their own empathy or whatever that thing is can just be completely gamed. And so, long story short, now people want to begin to modify our spiritual practice because man and woman are these categories that are dominant categories that Western people have invented. And, you know, even though this spiritual practice comes from freaking Indonesia of all places, right? These are colonialist ideas. And what about the non-binary people? What about this concept of gender? And how do we start to modify our beliefs to be inclusive of this thing that is destructive of just the basic facts of existence and the spiritual truths? I would argue, or I want to argue, but I don't really have anything to stand on other than my assertion that there's a spiritual truth to the content, the spiritual content of the female and the male. There's a deep, deep spiritual reality there. And there's a physical reality too. And in between that physical reality and that spiritual reality, there's this cultural reality that's, you know, it varies across time and it varies across space. And at this point in time, under the aegis or the shield or the umbrella of inclusion, diversity, and equity, is now being forced as a dogma that doesn't think of itself as a dogma onto us. And how do you stop that? Because if you are for discriminating against a woman who says that she's a man, or a man who says that he's a woman, or a man or a woman that says that they're neither man nor woman, that is by definition, it's very odiously offensive to the liberal Western way of viewing things. And the problem with the spiritual group, last point, I promise. This problem with my spiritual group in America is that they are all so liberal. They're a bunch of boomers who are a bunch of flower kids. They all just have assumed these things for so many years that they don't see the flaws in they don't even see their ideology as an ideology. They're all well-meaning centrist liberals. They have no idea that their position is not neutral. It is based on these assumptions that over the course of time and the erosion of what those principles were based on, being Christianity, I might add, all these post-Christian liberals, they have no idea that they're participating in a slide that will eventually corrode and probably break apart the spiritual group, because it can no longer, the Western way of viewing things cannot get along with the Muslim way of viewing things, cannot get along with the Indonesian way of viewing things, cannot get along with all these other ways of viewing things, because we're globalist. We think, our American mindset, we think that we think we know best for everybody for all time. We have no idea how blind we are. Sorry.
So I have 3 questions for you about that. One is this just conceptual in this group, or do you actually have somebody raising this question, like an actual example of somebody who thinks that they are non-binary, who wants to? Yeah. First of all, is it just
there's a
like
proposal that this person wants to train everybody else how to deal with LGBTQ plus IA, etc.
So this non-binary person is in the group and wants to
train everybody else. Because because they've already inserted into our bylaws that we have to go along with diversity, equity, inclusion. This is the outcome of it.
Okay. And then I guess the next question is, does this slide that you're describing of these well-meaning, liberal-minded people into, further and further, I don't know what you want to call this, progressive leftism, these new points that are is this an inevitable slide? Is this an organic slide? Or is this something that's being co-opted and sort of culturally engineered, do you think? And then third, how do you spell the word argue and pronounce it?
It's RU. And it's
How do you
spelled.
spell that?
Well, I don't pronounce it Arju, like Arjuna, who's one of my favorite literary characters.
How do most people pronounce it?
I don't know. I know that I'm right. I have it on authority from a linguist
Okay.
that my way is the future way. I am on the right side of the argument of history. Argument. What I see, I don't even know how to pronounce it.
It's like the Saturday Night Live skit about
It's more Monty Python. Like, how do you even pronounce are you?
argue.
No, like, why would you go through the process with all that wasted energy? It's just are you. It flows better. Are you?
So the G is silent. Is that what you're saying?
The G is just a bend in the word. Are you? Are you? It's just, it hyphenates. It doesn't hyphenate it. It emphasizes the you. You need 5 minutes?
No. I need another example of a time when a G is just a turn in a word. Like, is there a linguistic precedent for this? Or is this just like a trend you're trying to set?
I'm not even trying to set it. It's the same thing. All this LGBTQ plus IA etc stuff, all this post-liberal, postmodern stuff, it's not engineered. It's purely in alignment with entropy, with cultural entropy, which goes hand in hand with cultural leftism. The only way for power to gain more power is to destabilize power that stands in opposition to it, beginning with the individual. And the individual is a sexed individual. It's an embodied individual. It's a man and a woman. Now, that man or woman could be sterile. They could decide to not procreate. They could be homosexual. They could be more or less masculine or feminine, but they are a sexed individual. They would not exist without the act of Congress that brought them into being. Very few exceptions for IVF or whatever. We can look at all these different categories, and you can deconstruct them all, and you can show that the category themselves is enforcing all this bias and stuff like that. But this whole non-binary sexual or gender revolution stuff, it's essentially a denial of the reality of what a human being is.
Okay.
And it's coming from a lower point of view. It's coming from a descent away from an honest point of view. And that honest point of view, I think you're probably closer to it because you eat less processed food than I do. You don't allow yourself to enrich your wheat with anything other than just your own love and yeast. You probably just have like a canister of yeast that you yourself have cultivated over like all the travels that you've had around the world, from Finland to Texas. But that nature, that natural human contact, human reality is part and part. Separating from that, being uploaded into the screen, acceding to all this gender nonsense, acceding to all these identitarian categories, all that stuff is the process of taking away the individual's reality and experience and ceding it to a central authority. And I don't think it's engineered so much as it's just in line with entropy, and entropy is aligned with Cthulhu.
Why wouldn't it be engineered? Why would you not think that it would be engineered? It seems like you have to ignore a lot of evidence in order to take that stance.
Like what evidence then?
Well, like, I mean, the sex ed stuff, like the comprehensive sex ed stuff that deliberately sets out to confuse children and to insert this gender ideology into young kids' curricula, it comes straight from UNESCO and WHO, and it's being pushed around everywhere. I mean, it's all over the place. So it's not. If it were organic and just coming out of a process of organically moving along this same, line, you would think that there would be a little bit more variation, but it's cropping up everywhere all at once.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it just doesn't seem like that I think that's an important thing to consider.
It's absolutely important, and I'm not saying it's not in part engineered, but I think it's in line. I mean, you could go back and you could probably make the argument, or make a very compelling argument, that this is a part of population control, or it's in alignment with, like these greater big societal projects that have a historical basis. And I just interviewed Jason Bradley on my channel. Fabulous channel. Definitely go over there and watch that. He's got this deep dive into Malthusianism, or population control, that goes back to its roots in Victorian England, and then shows how it's basically part and parcel of like the UN and UNESCO and the WEF and stuff like that. So there are people, there are the masters of the universe. But I think I think it's, the one thing, and I can't make a really strong case for this, I can only very vaguely, this is kind of cope, very vaguely point to Camille Paglia's work. Paglia? Paglia. There's the one where you don't pronounce the G.
Okay.
Camille Paglia.
Okay, good. Thank you. That's a good example.
Okay. Camille Paglia, who says that transgenderism, broadly defined, crops up at the end of every empire. It's a cyclical process. It's a cyclical thing. People want to believe in transgenderism because it allows them to participate in a process of self-creation, which is a part and parcel of the trade-off that we get by participating in the system, is that the system takes away certain amounts of our freedom and then gives us other kinds of freedom. The freedom to be our true, authentic selves, or something like that. There's a trade-off. And so I think that there is a top-down aspect to it, but it only works so totally is because it's in a line with something that is more historical, more epochal, more just kind of a turn of, this is what kind of happens when human beings, I mean, you probably like the Tower of Babel story would probably be in line. You could make a lot of interpretations about that. This is kind of a natural cycle of human civilizational collapse.
So if you see it like that, and you see it sort of this spiral arc of history, then is there any point in resisting it at all?
Well, if you resist it, then you become in danger of the temptations that it offers the people who promote it, which is this point of view that you could possibly control a system that is so incredibly complex that nobody can control it other than a cabal of people whose interests don't even really align. So it's really unlikely that they'll even get their own way, because they are all self-motivated. They were selected by the system to be the mouthpieces of the system. And I think you see that on an archetypal level. If you look at the biggest player in the system, it would be the United States government. And if you look at the head of the United States government, or what serves as a head of the United States government, you see the spiritual reality of the system embodied in Joe Biden and, I don't want to say Kamala Harris, right? Like these people, they're fake, they're gay with a H and an E and a Y. They're inept. They have one job, and it's to speak, and they can't do that. They have one job is to show up and walk across the stage. They can't do that. They have one job is to not be absolute, just cringy assholes, and they can't even do that. Even their mouthpiece, Jean-Pierre, or however Tucker says her name, Marie Jean-Pierre, like the
Karen,
White House president.
Right, Karen?
She can't even speak. She can't even give me a sentence where she doesn't go, she can't even do her job. So and they're not doing that. You know, there's a response from the dissident right where like embarrassing you is the point. And I think it's not even the point. It's just the system is selected. It's showing itself to us. And so, okay, to go back to your question, how do you change that? You go down, you make things human level. You approach things, you be humble, you say, I only know certain things, and even the things that I do know, I don't know very well. And other people, I need to rely on other people, and I need to rely on other people through relationship, not through agreement, but through relationship. I need to return to a more human ish way of behaving in the world, and that is not a global, I'm going to change the system, I'm going to overthrow the system. The resistance is, it's got to be very carefully, in my opinion. James Lindsay's a different guy. The Daily Wire guys, they Daily Wire, they do these big boycotts and they celebrate the defeat of Bud Light or whatever. James Lindsay's big systems thinker, way beyond me. And somebody's at the door. I hope it's not my neighbor. It's probably just the guy who's dropping off things. But if it's the neighbor,
You need to check.
maybe kids are being dropped off. Okay. I don't know. They can go away.
So even James Lindsay has talked about just opting out, and that's one way to resist this. That a lot of this stuff, a lot of the social crediting and other technocratic, I guess, advancements that are going to be troublesome for us will be opt-in. I mean, even the vaccine to some extent was opt-in. They just made it very difficult for people who wanted to not take it. You know, they were in, but I mean, even masks were, you could opt out of wearing masks and getting vaccinated. So that's resistance on the small scale. How are you doing that in your life?
How am I being
Yeah.
more human in my own life?
Yeah, you said that you need to do this on the small scale through relationship and
Yeah.
being human. Yeah.
What kind of answer? Do you want the real answer, or do you want like a publicly, a recorded conversation appropriate answer?
Host's choice.
Oh, wow. Okay. You're really like dangling it out there for me to.
Just, you could say it however you want.
Well, I mean, I think that my mode of engagement online dictates a certain sort of human-sized mode of engagement. Long form interviews, trying to listen better, not really caring about culture war stuff, even though I kind of have to because that's the business model, you know, but like trying to figure out ways of not being culture war-y, even though like I have to be culture war-y, because the culture's there and there's no culture without war. So what am I going to do? How about you?
I mean, I've kind of been, it's weird. Like, I think most of my, if you want to call it resistance, has been small scale most of my life, you know, just on the personal level. I have, I don't really like social media very much. I know I have a YouTube channel.
I
and that's
convinced you to get a Twitter, didn't I?
Yeah. And it's still small. I don't use it very much. I put up when I remember to, I post my video links, and that's pretty much what I use it for. I forget I have it for days at a time, and I'll go in and look at it and kind of just like put hearts on a couple things. But I haven't really tried playing with it a whole lot because I know once I start playing with it, it's going to play back and I'm going to really get more engaged with it. And I hesitate to get engaged with it. I had a Facebook account until like 2017, and getting off of that was one of the best things I ever did. Just I find it really stressful to see everybody's, I guess it's the, you know, what you said about weak opinions strongly held. That's what it feels like. It feels like it's just everybody shouting at you all the time about what they think about particular articles or particular, you know, things in the news cycle. And so being more engaged with people in real life and less engaged with people online has been really helpful in my world. And then I most of my work is individual, you know. I have this YouTube thing, but it's just conversations one-on-one, usually, sometimes more than one. I mean, the solid ground is there's always 4 or 5 of us, and that's fun. But my work with clients is very personal and individual. And yeah. So I guess I agree with what you said about the human on the human level. And I do have friends and I know people who get really caught up in the internet and think that they're going to make a big difference by having these arguments online. Arguments online, I would say. And
You
and
can be in the past. You can be an old fogey if that's what you want to do.
well, I wonder what the utility of that is, because you're just really seeing one little slice of somebody when you do that. You're not really arguing with, you're not really going to change minds. You're just shouting back and forth.
Yeah, you know, like there's certain topics that I get a little heated under the collar with, but I mean, I personally don't argue, but like child transition is a big problem. But if I'm really serious,
People's minds online.
what?
I mean, are you going to change people's minds like on Twitter using? Not you. I mean, is a person.
Yeah.
Sorry. I guess you know. It's. Just, I guess if you're responding in line to what I said about people, that way of challenging some of these issues through sentences back and forth on the internet, does
Yeah.
that change anybody's mind, or does that actually help?
I never argue back and forth on Twitter ever. I'm not good at it, and I just dislike it. I don't think it's pointful. I think it's pointless. But throwing my opinion out into the void, but documenting the disastrous result of unnecessary medical, surgical, and hormonal modifications of young bodies, up to and including sterilization, castration, and just outright mutilation. No offense, and in all respect to the detransitioners themselves. I know they don't like those terms, but by facilitating other people and by lending my voice to a particular point of view, in aggregate gives more people a little bit more wiggle room to voice their opinions, to think twice. Now, going directly after somebody doesn't work for me, and I don't do that, but being involved in a broader project of raising awareness and detransitioner allyship, I think is somewhat useful, but again, it's more counted in the lives that I've touched and the content, the quality of the content that I've produced than the political outcomes. But, you know, I mean, but something like that has to change. Now I say that, you know, but if I'm really, really honest with my opinions, and please forgive me, everybody who this is going to deeply offend, but abortion is just not good. A blasé relationship to abortion is very out of line with deeply held core beliefs of mine. But that ship is kind of already sailed. I don't know how that, I guess I bring that up because I don't know how that's different than trying to stop the sterilization, the needless sterilization of youth. What's the difference between that and just wide scale abortion as birth control for the low impulse controlled and poorly, the people who are just, you know, like, what does that say about our culture? How does that feed into women's, the perception of women's bodies as just like baby machines? I mean, what does that say? What does that tell us about women's bodies? That they're just these autonomous, you know, individual, consenting, willful beings that have no tie to a lineage of life. Like, what does that do to her? You know, so the transition thing, that's new, and a lot of people are pro-abortion or anti-transing kids and anti-surrogacy. But then when you start to like really look at their values, it's like their values, if they are pro-abortion, like it gets kind of like, how can you say that the kid doesn't have consent when they're 12, but not when they're 12 weeks? Like what is the basic, like, and so that's the conversation. It's like, okay, what are the real values going on here, and how are they not how is it not a continuum from just like a woman's body is just like this thing that she gets to do whatever she wants with, to a child's body is not a thing that they can do whatever they want with?
There's a lot there.
There is.
You just said a lot of things.
I did.
Yeah.
Hopefully you're going to say something back.
So starting with the beginning of what you were saying, I do think that creating that kind of material, those producing those kind of conversations and generating discussion, and as you said, kind of with your eyes rolling, but like raising awareness. I think that that's really valuable, and I think that's different than just maybe sharing memes or writing a sentence here and there. I think, and I wasn't talking about you when I said that either. I was
like
just
memes,
saying,
though.
like, I know people who
Well, but
stay on something like Facebook or stay in particular groups just because they feel like they provide sort of a counter perspective to the norm that they're seeing there, and they think that it's important to keep on duking it out there and providing their counter argument to the the status quo, and they find value in that. And I'm not sure that there's much value in that. I think sometimes those things just become echo chambers, and you're just stressing yourself out being in there. And that's getting back to the conversation that we were having just prior about bringing it down to a more human level, where maybe the amount of effort, energy, and stress that you're expending in that venture isn't necessarily worthwhile, because it's not going to change minds, and it's not going to move the needle. Maybe. And that's how I feel about that. But then you kind of you open up the topic of transition, childhood transition, or underage gender transition, and then you compared it to abortion and asked some questions about. Well, I think those issues are very different. I think that they have a uniting thread, and you kind of point that out. But I think they're very different, because one is a matter of elective cosmetic medical access. I mean, the whole transition thing, medical gender transition, is about providing cosmetic results to people to help them to feel better about whatever they're feeling inside, making their outside match their inside. That's the argument, right? It's very similar to body dysmorphia and curing a sense of dysmorphia with a cosmetic procedure that changes the hated feature. So somebody might really hate their nose, or hate their, I don't know, maybe some other aspect of their body that there's an easy cosmetic fix for, and maybe not even easy, but an available cosmetic fix for. And you can go out, and as a consumer of cosmetic surgery, you can avail yourself of a service that will alleviate that dysmorphia, because your nose was really big and now it's nice and it's got a cute little nose, like whatever celebrity picture you brought in. And now you go forward without the burden of that particular self-consciousness. And so the gender affirming surgeries and hormones and things do a similar thing, because they don't actually change the sex of the person, and everybody knows that, but they do provide some cosmetic alignment with what the person thinks that they want. And so I think that's a very different topic to abortion. It's very different. I mean, you're trying to unite those two things based on
the way that you defined it, that's very good. That's a very salient way of pushing back against me. But when we get to castrating, mastectomies, when we get to defacing the sex of an individual, that's saying something about our culture where that is not sacred. That is a secondary sex characteristic. That's not an essential aspect.
It's a really big departure from even where we were just a few years ago, because a few years ago, maybe 20 years ago, there was this whole thing about Viagra. I don't know if you remember this thing about pharmacists could deny filling some birth control prescriptions based on religious belief, but they couldn't deny filling Viagra prescriptions. And so this was kind of I think there was a feminist critique of this. This was a problem that was being raised around medical.
I think this is probably Catholic too, so there's probably some sort of theological reasoning that ties those things together, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, sure, there's probably some longer form argument to be made around those two things and was made around those things. But basically, it was being held up as an example of discrepancy of value for women's healthcare versus men's healthcare, and the relative, I guess, the relative weight of those two issues. One being this birth control, family planning, right, idea. The other being
family planning.
Yeah, I mean control of
Is that
birth,
a
right?
euphemism or?
It is a euphemism. Yes.
Okay, family planning. Okay.
Yeah.
Up to and including destroying a viable human fetus in the womb.
That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the birth control pill versus Viagra. Like simply, that's all I'm talking about right now. And I'm not even taking a for or against position. I talk about what I think about birth control if you want, but that's not what I'm doing. I'm just saying that this was the argument that was being made, was that birth control is more important. It's not simply about sexual function or sexual pleasure, although it actually kind of is. But anyway, it's being posited that that was a more fundamental, foundational, and necessary thing versus Viagra, which is more elective and frivolous, because it's just about a man getting an erection. It's not about whether or not they're going to have anyway. I really got into the weeds on that, because when I start to pull that argument apart, they do kind of intersect in a weird way, or not even a weird way, just in a necessary way. Anyway, but it's not my argument. It's just to say that this was a dialogue that was happening maybe 15 or 20 years ago, and there was such an argument for Viagra being really important, which demonstrates a cultural value in sexual function that is completely lost when we're talking about like the idea that sterilizing kids are causing permanent sexual dysfunction in a whole generation of people through the use of these hormones. Oh, no big deal. That's just like this, like it just, I guess I'm just saying that it seems shockingly hypocritical and new that we would have a callous and casual attitude about things that not that long ago were so important that they were being duked out in the culture, in terms of like, should older men be able to access drugs for their erections? And that's so important, critical to this culture. And now it doesn't even matter that kids are going to be sterilized. Like we don't even care about that.
Was it really that big of was Viagra really that big of a deal? I mean, I was having too much sex to care about it back then.
You were a kid, weren't you? I mean, you were like, we were
18, 19, 20. Right? Were you caught up in the Viagra versus birth control? Did you go out there burning bras or, I don't know, like girdles?
No.
Burning chastity belts? I just don't remember it being that big of a cultural issue, but that was so long ago, and we didn't have social media, so the way that it played out was probably much different. I was probably just not plugged into the particular media in which that was being.
I mean, it was around. It's something I remember.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. But I mean, I did throw out some very incendiary things about birth control, about birth control,
about abortion.
Conception control. So, just. I mean, I just like, I'm trying to, well, and I could bring up a third thing to actually like ground myself in a very, just point to my hypocrisy, which is really embarrassing, but I could do that anyways. But if my values are to be cohesive or continuous, whatever that word is, like coherent, consistent, then what's the, why am I not as vocal about abortion as I am about the transition of children? And maybe because the abortion is just kind of part of our culture now. There's no going back. Right? And maybe is it because transing kids is so new and so shocking and so relevant? And it also, it's like, okay, well, it's one thing to stop a life from happening, even though it's already kind of started. And it's another thing to take the life that's already started and then to impose upon it a bunch of different beliefs that will probably fade with the culture, and then leave that human being that's in the body, that's in the world already, to just kind of deal with the pieces of that mess. Now, maybe they'll be happy, right? Maybe they'll be happy with their transition, but what about all the people that aren't happy with their transition? What about like the 14-year-olds that aren't really fully developed on so many different levels? So I'm just wondering. And then if I kind of really critique that, and go the Mary Harrington route, where like in her book Feminism Against Progress, she eventually makes an argument that women need to give up birth control, that women need to kind of walk away from the imposition of technocracy into their wombs and really understand what it is to be a woman, be really natural. Like the flip side of that would be pornography. Pornography is a technological imposition of sexual stimulation. Is that any worse to spend your life coming into a sock than it is to every once in a while in your life, like taking a vacuum cleaner and sucking an embryo out of your womb? I mean, like, is there not a continuum of like, my will be done and I'm superseding nature, I'm cheating nature on all these different fronts? Is there not like the male, and that goes, and that's good that you brought up Viagra, because like, what's the difference between birth control and Viagra? What's the difference between pornography and abortion? They're kind of all speaking to the same technocratic Luciferian, which I mean will over nature, will over love, mind over matter ethos that, when I look at it, is ruinous. So if I'm going to really be coherent and consistent with my values, then why do I, why is child transition the one that I'm going after? Yeah, I do mock abortionists. I think that they're worshiping Satan, but
Abortionists being people who support abortion rights.
People who want to sing their abortion, people who want to share their stories of abortion. I think they're worshipers of this creature called Moloch. I think it, like you brought up a word in private conversation called antinatalism, and I think that's a really loaded term. I think it's more like technocratic Luciferianism than antinatalism. It's not necessarily against life; it's for the will, as though the will can overstand life. It's the destruction of life for the sake of the will, and that idol of the will. And Moloch would just be like a stand-in for the human being's destruction of life for, its own will, the glorification of its intention.
Well, you said a lot there too.
I said a lot again, Leslie, and you didn't let me know. You didn't interrupt me. You just let me peel off in the sunset.
I don't want to interrupt you. It's fine. So going back to abortion versus childhood transition, I think those are just, I do see the thread. Sorry if you can hear road noise behind me. It's noisy here.
Are you ever going to fix that, or is that just going to be a part of your channel? It's like the cat videos for me. It's like, oh, look, road noise. It's like, oh, I'm with Leslie again. Every time they're conditioning all the people, it's like my harm bell. Whenever they hear like traffic, they're like, oh, I wish Leslie was talking into my ear now.
Yeah, it's like this intersection I live near. It's just very noisy.
You just can't get away from intersectionality. It's always just like harsh and you're mellow, isn't it?
Good point. It must be symbolic. But I guess the abortion issue is really, it's a delicate one, because I think that there are a lot of people who would draw distinctions based on what point in the pregnancy you terminate the pregnancy. I think that there's a lot of room for reasonable people to have those discussions. It seems to me that there's a point during which, there's a point of, a lot of people would argue that there's a point of viability after which the fetus could live outside of the mother, and then it's murderous to kill that person, because they could live on their own, or outside of another person's body. And there's a point before that time when there's there's some debate and some argument that could be had. And I think in my way of thinking, it's a spiritual issue, and it shouldn't be an issue for state interference. That's what I think about it. I mean, we could talk about whether I think it's right or wrong.
Yeah.
And I might, I could say what I think. I think that person had one chance to live, and you should let them have that chance. If they've been conceived, they have a potential path and a future, and the right thing is to proceed and not terminate, generally speaking. I mean, I just don't, but I'm not going to, but in terms of the state,
do you support,
I don't support the state having a say in that.
What about child transition, though? What do you think about these transition laws then?
Oh, I think that the child transition thing is just a medical malpractice scandal.
So you're saying that should be a higher authority imposing its will on personal medical procedure, personal choice medical procedure.
I think that the tort system is going to be able to figure that out. I think that we just need to figure out how to bring these to court. We already have a system for defining and saying what is wrong with this. It's an absolute it's an absolute scandal that this is being allowed to happen, because we have informed consent laws, and we know that kids they don't have the capacity to sign off on making the changes that they're making right now.
Do they have a capacity to sign off on being aborted? I'm sorry. Cheap shot. I'm sorry.
No, but at the same time, when you're talking about early stages of a pregnancy, there is a valid question about whose rights are you looking at. There's two people. You're not talking about just a baby. You're talking about a baby and a mom. And so I'm just saying, from the framework that we have for understanding these things, that is tricky.
Okay.
I'm not saying where you need to fall on it, but I'm saying that it's a messier framework for decision making in terms of when I was in law school, we did this one, we studied this one case where a man killed his wife, and she was pregnant at the time. And I think that there was somebody will probably remember this, but I don't remember the case, and I don't remember the decision on it, but there was a lengthy decision written about whether, I don't remember if it was determined that it was a double homicide. Yeah, I don't remember. But that decision has implications for lots of things lots of ways that the state can encroach upon the woman's rights during her pregnancy. So if during your pregnancy, that child has all the rights of any person walking around, and the state has some kind of guardianship rights to monitor how parents treat their children, then at what point can the state put a woman into some kind of prison so that she can't smoke, so that they can monitor and make sure she doesn't smoke, or she doesn't eat something that the doctors have determined she shouldn't be eating during her pregnancy, or can decide that medical best practices, such as it's been determined, ma'am, that you must have a COVID-19 shot during your pregnancy because the Doctors Association, the American Medical Association, has decided that this is what everybody needs. And if you try to opt out of that, then you are harming your baby because you're not following best practices. And so at the point at which the state has the right to say what happens to the unborn child, you enter into something that's pretty messy. And so I'm not saying whether I think it's
that's a very well argued. That's a very
level.
Yeah, that's very.
So
that's
I'm just saying it's very messy.
Yeah. Okay. And you want one of your values would be to limit messiness. Would that be an intellectual value of yours?
Yeah, I don't want messiness. Yeah, you could say that. Well, I mean, I just think that autonomy, going back to autonomy, I think I said that earlier when you were asking. And I think that when you give any bureaucratic system or institution the power to make decisions for people, what that institution is going to start to do is make decisions based on aggregates. And you really can't take aggregates of human well-being and distill them down to what's best for an individual. That decision-making I think the decision making for individuals is best done on in the smallest units possible.
Yes,
generally.
I agree with that.
So,
Yeah.
So I just think it's if you know, you could draw a line between gender affirming surgeries and abortion, but it's difficult from a systemic legal perspective.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I appreciate that.
And then
You
what
made a
else?
mess of my ideas, so good job.
Okay. Anytime. What else? What was the other point that you had after that? It was about birth control. Oh, birth control and antinatalism and
Pornography.
Mary Harrington pornography. Okay. I think birth control is a very bad idea in terms of hormonal manipulation. And I think that there are some really, I've heard and read some very interesting ideas about how birth control and the ease of preventing pregnancy has impacted our culture in terms of sexual relationships and the commodification of sex. And I think that that has some very interesting, there's a lot there, and it's worth a conversation. But if I were to oppose birth control, first and foremost, it would just be on a health basis, because our hormonal systems are so complex. I don't think we know what we're doing when we start messing with them. And I don't think that we should take these pharmaceutical products so haphazardly and give them out to young girls so widely. I think they cause major changes in your body and your mind, and it's a massive manipulation of the human experience on an individual and social level. And I think we play with them way too easily. In general, pharmaceuticals in general, I don't trust pharmaceuticals in general.
Okay. Yeah. And pornography.
Pornography. You want to talk about that?
Do you trust it? What's your perspective? Because I think, like, I started this conversation when we started in earnest, trying to ask you, like, what's something that ties your values together, like trying to push beyond this radical centrism into, like, this is Leslie Elliott. She's got a position, and it impacts her point of view on a number of different topics. And it's very clean to say, okay, child transition, abortion, birth control, and pornography. Those are all related to sexual health, to the viability of the process of being alive, of producing life, and also of engaging in relationships and what relationships mean. It all asks fundamental relationships about the fundamental aspect of human beings, which is sexual health, sexual relationships, and intimacy. So pornography, we can't leave pornography off the table because that's giving guys the free pass. We're just bagging on women the whole episode.
Well, I think pornography is really dangerous, and I think it's it's dangerous for everybody involved, really. The user of porn, rather than bonding and having the opportunity to bond and connect with another human being in an intimate way, bonds with the act of voyeurism. And so when you are, it's such an explicit topic, but
any more explicit than vacuuming a fetus out of a woman's womb?
I mean, you're the one using those words. I don't know if I would use those words.
I'm sorry. I meant to say family planning. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, so I mean, when you're experiencing sexual climax, you're secreting a lot of hormones, and there's a lot that's going on. It's not just some insignificant
evacuation of
so when you're doing that, and the stimulus that you're using is some online or material voyeuristic thing that you're not actually engaging with that other person, then what you're bonding with is that act of it's like secondhand. You're it's there's it becomes you become more likely to do that in the future, and the act of actually engaging with a partner becomes more distant from you and more awkward. It's just more difficult. You're setting yourself up to have that kind of sexuality, a distant and remote and disconnected sort of sexuality in life. And you're not only when, and there's a lot of information about this. I'm not the expert to get this from, but when men are masturbating to pornography, they're able to control certain things, masturbation in general. So you're controlling the physical experience as well, and you get used to that way of climaxing, and it becomes harder to experience something like that with your partner. So you actually make it less likely that you're going to experience satisfying sexual relationship with a human woman when you engage in pornography. Not only that, but you're distracting your own drive. I mean, you're giving yourself a release that makes you less likely to need to pursue real interaction. And we have the data suggests that young people are having less and less sex. And why is that? I would suspect that part of it is that they don't have the same need to pursue that in relationship with one another if they can distract and relieve themselves of those drives in a way that doesn't involve the messy and awkward and sometimes difficult and lengthy experience of an inconvenient experience of having to seek out a partner or engage with the partner that they already have. So it's an easy out. But what do you get when you get an easy out? You get less of the rewarding, long-term, satisfying wins that you would get if you engaged in a real relationship. So I think you're hurting yourself when you engage in pornography use, first and foremost. But look at the experience for the people who are creating the stuff. I mean, it might be temporarily satisfying and validating on some level for a young woman to think that she's sexually powerful and to exploit that and to be a part of that process of exploitation of herself. Maybe she gets some sort of superficial narcissistic validation from that, but I can't imagine that that's very deeply satisfying. I mean, what are the social implications? What are the lives of these people like after porn? And how many years can a typical person who engages in pornography sustain that and sustain an audience for that? I mean, if your whole value or your main value in life is about being sexually attractive, then you've built something that's not going to last, because even the most beautiful woman isn't going to stay beautiful forever. Even the prettiest body isn't going to stay young and strong and sexy forever. And
nothing lasts forever. I mean, if we're going to talk about that.
No, nothing lasts forever. But in terms of a life, women have a short shelf life in terms of being optimally attractive.
Yeah.
And it's, I don't think that this is like empirical if we wanted to drill it down to ones and zeros, but in terms of the value of a human being, I mean, that's more spiritual when you're talking about what is the value of a human life. But I would think that most people could agree that there's more to it than superficial validation of attractiveness during one's youth. We would like to see people cultivate other parts of ourselves. Like, think about if you had a daughter, would you be really happy for her to go into a life of pornography? Would you like that if she went into that? Like, say she's 18 and she's like, I'm going to do like cam girl stuff and I'm going to start producing this material. And how long do you think your daughter can do that? And what do you think about her doing that? Or what if that were your mother? If your mom told you that that's what she used to do? It's just, so I'm getting really, I'm getting in the weeds and having difficulty articulating this because it's more, I guess it's more philosophical. It's just, what's the life of a person like if they're only cultivating that aspect of themselves? I think they're cheating themselves out of a breadth and depth of experience and identity development. And so if you opt to be the audience for that, you're participating in someone's shallow self-destruction. And that's even if it's somebody who fully opted in for it and isn't trafficked, which a lot of people are on those sites. So even if you're making sure that you think you're selecting ethical porn, where it's just a woman who's benefiting financially
shade
from
grown.
her own shade grown, yeah, bird friendly, rainforest friendly.
It's just a woman taking a bath.
Yeah.
The camera's 500 feet away. It's a really nice camera, though. And she signed consent forms and everything like that. Nobody's being exploited.
Yeah. She's not exploiting herself.
I don't know.
And you're also driving and participating in creating attention to a content area that is rife with actual dangerous, violent exploitation of women and children. So there's that as well. I mean, maybe not least of those reasons. There's that. Maybe most of those. Maybe that is the primary evil that's being done by pornography. But I think that it's harmful on every level. And it's harmful within relationships, too. I mean, there's the whole porn widow phenomenon, the dead bedroom phenomenon, where it's just easier for, and I tend to generalize and say men, but, just generally speaking, it's easier for men to relieve sexual tension quickly and conveniently with pornography, which also is highly, highly addictive. And so once they start using it, it's very hard for them to resist it. And why should they resist it when it's on their cell phone at all times in just seconds? They can have access to lots of stimulation at any moment. So it's and in privacy without anybody knowing it. So it's an extremely tempting and addictive substance or habit or whatever. And it's also very convenient. And so even if you are in a marriage or a relationship, it's so much easier to just relieve that tension quickly there. And then you have so much less energy for your partner, which leads to lots of lonely marriages. I don't know. That's a big, messy topic.
It's big and messy. It's big and messy. I'm trying to figure out how it all ties together. How it
ties together with abortion.
Well, I guess just to make it like more.
You're trying to create like some narrative arc for
our conversation. Because I want to take this. I want to take this offline.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah. But before we do that, we have to like put a bow on it somehow.
Okay.
Like, put a bow on it. So, I mean, I'm trying to figure out like what are your guiding principles when it comes to this kind of like this range of topics. I hear with regard to pornography, it's about self-value and it's about relational value. With regard to abortion, it's you use the term spiritual, but that does have like some sort of value with regard to life and to human flourishing and to human future and like kind of like an understanding of the value of the human being. The transition, I guess, is again, it's the understanding of the value of the human being as a holistic, self-perpetuating entity that is or does have some sort of purpose that isn't just to be in the center of it all. Maybe. So maybe radical center is not about being in the center of everything.
Well, I guess I don't know if this, I think that it's really important to just be able to live a somewhat original life and have your own thoughts and your own experiences. And I value awkwardness, which, I think that it's how we stumble through and think our own way. I think that there's this, what's this saying about don't reinvent the wheel? There's this idea that you should rely and build. You should always be building on and progressing forward based on things that other people have already said and done better than you. But there's some value in just discovering life for yourself and discovering what you think for yourself and having a unique experience without having, gosh, we're checking all the time to our reference groups to make sure we're not saying something stupid or, sounding offensive to these people, or, I think that there's something to be said for just giving it a go and not being afraid and not being self-conscious.
Just being a cutie pootie.
Yeah.
What's coming out of that?
So, this is such an awkward conversation.
It was really awkward, but you wanted to have it, so we're going to have another one in the future. No, you can erase
it. Just erase the whole thing.
Oh, I'm not going to erase it. No, what are you talking about? I wanted to get into relationships and stuff, but we're building a rapport. We're like at the beginning of building a rapport, so like, let's be awkward. You said yourself, you just said, like 90 seconds ago.
Yeah, but this is like too
awkwardness
awkward.
Awkwardness is so valuable. It's so valuable. Yeah. Like just like you're like kind of like this overripe apricot, so and like
there's. I want to be in the radical center of awkwardness, where there's like too awkward over here, and there's not awkward enough over here.
I think you're over awkwardizing this conversation. I think it was a perfectly fine, brilliant conversation. But why don't you plug your show, Radical Centrist, Leslie Elliott? You have a Monday live stream. Every once in a while, you have to like go to Finland, and I end up hosting it or whatever. But like, tell people what you do, and you also run a counseling practice. Sorry, coaching. Yes. Practice, because you get sued if you call yourself a counselor.
Yes, I'm not a licensed counselor, but I do have a coaching practice. So, and I have a YouTube channel. It's called The Radical Center, and I do a live stream every Monday. It's the Solid Ground live stream. We've been doing it since January of this year, and it's really fun. We really get into a variety of different topics, and we always have some exploration of them and then just discussion. There are 4 of us usually in that. It's Jennifer Friend, a nice gentleman named David from the UK, and Deborah Knox. And we started it with Jody Shaw, but she's taking a bit of a break from doing the lives right now. So maybe she'll be back in the future.
Yeah. It's good stuff. Mm-hmm. Your YouTube channel is doing very well.
It's fun.
Very, very proud of you for stepping out of your little container and into
the
world stage. You belong there. So, in closing, I'd like to spend a night with you. If you don't mind, would you let me know?
Just one?
Okay.